Hello, we will now start Samsung SDS Logistics Division's monthly webinar for April. We are glad to meet again this month. Spring is all around us. I hope everyone watching this webinar enjoys this beautiful season. Now, let us dive into the topic of this month, global economic recovery and easing of supply chain crunch expected. Let us first start with the economic trends. In the economic section, we will examine the global economic growth forecast and key indicators such as manufacturing PMI, consumer price index, the CPI, and the economic trends of major countries. Economic growth rate, represented by the real GDP growth rate, indicates the percentage growth of the real gross domestic product, reflecting the actual size of the economy by valuing all goods and services produced within a country in a base year. This is a crucial economic indicator used to evaluate the economic soundness of a country. Economic growth rate forecasts are primarily announced by international organizations such as the OECD, IMF, World Bank, and domestic institutions like the Bank of Korea. Looking at the most recent data, compared to OECD's forecast announced in November last year, there was an upward adjustment in global growth rates by IMF in January, followed by OECD in February. It seems various institutions are adjusting the growth rates, reflecting the upward trend in the global economy. Examining the indicators from the OECD's Interim Economic Outlook report released on February 5, the forecast for global economic growth was revised upward by 0.2 percentage points to 2.9% compared to the forecast in November, which was 2.7%. This adjustment is expected to be due to the anticipation of recovery in the growth momentum of the United States and China as expected by IMF and OECD. The graph on the right shows the indicator from the Bank of Korea released in February. The Bank of Korea presents the economic growth rate on a semi-annual basis. While there might be volatility due to geopolitical risks, it is forecasted that major countries will continue to grow in the latter half of the year as high interest rates and high inflation improve. Let's take a look at the Purchasing Managers' Index, the PMI, and Consumer Price Index, the CPI, charts. The manufacturing PMI is an indicator that assesses the activity level of the manufacturing sector based on surveys conducted among purchasing managers regarding orders, production levels, and inventory levels. This indicator signifies growth if it is above 50 and contraction if it is below 50. The logistics industry utilizes manufacturing PMI as a key indicator to predict and respond to the activity level of the manufacturing sector. Therefore, there is a tendency for logistics activities to expand as manufacturing PMI increases. Now, examining the manufacturing PMI of major countries in March, the United States entered an expansionary phase with a reading of 50.3, the first time since October 2022, showing stable trends in growth, consumption, and employment. China has hovered around the baseline for 5 consecutive months since September 2023, but it has shown signs of an expansion phase with a 1.7% increase to 50.8 compared to the previous month, which is being interpreted by the market as a signal of stabilization in the global economic conditions. The Consumer Price Index, the CPI, of the United States on the right graph represents changes in costs actually incurred by urban consumers in the US. CPI is used to measure inflation and is a key indicator used by the Federal Reserve in determining interest rate policies. The US CPI has fluctuated around the mid-3% range since June last year, with 3.2% in February and 3.5% in March, indicating a renewed increase in inflation. Let me briefly discuss the economic outlook for each country. In China, during March's annual legislative sessions, known as the Two Sessions, the government set a growth target of 5% for the economy and began implementing stimulus measures to boost recovery. However, despite the government's efforts, challenges persist, particularly with the real estate market, which accounts for 25% of China's GDP. Additionally, the prolonged US-China trade dispute continues to place burden on the country's growth prospects. Additionally, while the government is leading growth, many suggest that the private sector has yet to feel the full effects of growth. Although export volumes have been increasing since the end of last year, there are still many challenges that need to be addressed. In the case of South Korea, amidst sluggish domestic consumption due to high inflation and interest rates, export growth has been steadily increasing for several months, driven by recovery of the global semiconductor industry. The most recently announced AMRO, a macroeconomic research organization of ASEAN, Korea, China, and Japan, said this year that Korea's semiconductor exports will recover with a growth rate of 2.3%. The figure is the same as the IMF's economic growth rate in Korea and is higher than the Bank of Korea's 2.1% forecast. Let's take a look at the economic trends in Vietnam. Vietnam is emerging as a major manufacturing hub thanks to the global manufacturing bases moving out of China. In the first quarter of 2024, goods exports increased by 17%, and according to data released by the Vietnam General Statistics Office on March 29, GDP in the first quarter grew by 5.66% compared to the same period last year. This is the highest growth rate for a first quarter since 2019, indicating an expectation of economic recovery to pre-pandemic levels. As you remember, I briefly explained the PMI in the previous slide. In a survey of the PMI in the US, when asked about efforts to diversify imports away from China, 24% of purchasing and supply managers responded that they had diversified imports to third countries, which is an increase of 6 percentage points from the same month last year. This suggests that US companies are seeking to diversify their sources of imports. In line with this, after President Joe Biden's visit to Hanoi in September last year, where US-Vietnam relations were strengthened, the US held discussions on expanding semiconductor cooperation with Vietnam on March 26. This indicates a trend of reducing dependence on the Chinese supply chain by the US. Furthermore, according to the Joint European Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam, the Business Confidence Index, the BCI, increased by 6.5 points to 52.8 compared to the previous quarter. This indicates a significant increase in European companies' optimism about the Vietnamese economy. Looking at the European indicators on the right, it is forecasted that low growth will persist due to geopolitical tensions and rising energy prices. According to the IMF's January forecast, the Eurozone's growth rate was lowered by 0.1 percentage points to 1.7% compared to the previous year, and Germany's growth rate was lowered by 0.4 percentage points to 1.6%. Finally, let's examine the employment trends in the United States. In March, employment in the U.S. exceeded expert forecasts, with Dow Jones estimating 200,000 jobs, but the actual result showed a significant increase to 303,000 jobs. Employment figures for January and February were also revised upwards by about 20,000 jobs. Conversely, the unemployment rate declined, reflecting the resilience of the U.S. economy. Looking at the National Retail Federation, the NRF's graph of U.S. retail imports on the right, you can see the growth of the U.S. economy. This is considered one of the indicators reflecting the soundness of the U.S. economy. Considering the atmosphere of inflation rebound, a robust job market, expansion of PMI index, and rising commodity prices in the U.S., the Federal Reserve initially anticipated 0.25 percentage point interest rate cuts this year. However, market expectations for rate cuts are diminishing, with some even suggesting the possibility of further increases rather than cuts. Until recently, following the FOMC, Federal Open Market Committee, meeting on March 20, the expected number of rate cuts for the year remained at 3, consistent with previous expectations. And, after Chairman Powell's press conference, the probability of the first rate cut in June increased from 50% to 70%. Currently, the market sentiment is shifting. Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, recently warned that U.S. interest rates could rise to over 8% in a few years. According to the CME Group FedWatch, expectations for the Fed's first rate cut in June have faded, and major bond funds like PIMCO have reduced their forecasts for rate cuts this year from 3 to 2. All these trends show how the market mood for a U.S. rate cut is fluctuating. Although the global economy is rebounding and expectations for improvements in logistics supply chains are rising, caution is necessary due to future volatility and geopolitical risks. Now, let us move on to the ocean part of the presentation. This is a forecast of the SCFI Composite Index and freight rates by major routes by Samsung SDS Logistics Data Innovation Group. The SCFI Composite Index averaged 2010 in Q1 due to the supply chain disruption, which was double the Q4 2023 average of 1089. However, it has been declining since early February ahead of the Lunar New Year holiday and is expected to remain weak in Q2 at between 1,455 and 1,620 points. Despite the absorption effect of the Red Sea crisis, strong supply growth pressures from new buildings are likely to continue to depress freight rates across all routes for the foreseeable future. Reflecting this, the average freight rate forecast for the second quarter is $2,922 per foot for WCNA, $4,401 per foot for ECNA, and $1,497 per TEU for North Europe, all down from the first quarter. Let us take a look at the market outlook announced by major shipping companies and organizations. First, Have Ben Jansen, CEO of Hapag-Lloyd, gave an outlook for the maritime market in the second half of 2024 in an interview with CNBC in mid-March. It is difficult to estimate how long the current Red Sea situation will last, and it is predicted that it may continue until the second half of this year. In addition, it was stated that action was needed because carbon dioxide emissions would increase by about 260 to 350% due to the increased distance and speed caused by the Cape of Good Hope detour, which would lead to a sharp increase in emission credit costs for ships passing through European countries. And, due to concerns about a strike by the port unions in the East Coast and Gulf regions of North America, which is expected to occur in October, it was predicted that the start of the peak season for North America routes this year could be moved to June, earlier than usual. AlixPartner, a US-based global consulting firm, also published an outlook report on the shipping market in February, predicting that container capacity in 2023 would reach 27.8 million TEUs, up 8% from the previous year, and that the oversupply situation would continue with a number of newbuilding deliveries scheduled, including 2 million TEUs this year and 1.5 million TEUs next year. It was also predicted that when Gemini cooperation between Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd starts in February next year, downward pressure on freight rates will continue due to intensified competition between alliances on major routes. BIMCO, the Baltic International Maritime Council, published its container market report in March. It forecasts a 3.6% year-on-year growth in container volumes in 2024, while the growth in fleet, or supply, is expected to be 9.5% year-on-year, leaving a gap of 5.9 percentage points between growth and supply. This gap is wider than the supply-demand gap of 5.3 percentage points in the previous report in January. The widening of the gap is mainly due to supply growth, with a record 2.8 million TEU of newbuilding deliveries scheduled for 2024, as well as increased demand for older ships diverted by the Red Sea crisis, which has pushed recycling or scrapping to next year. This is the container volume outlook from maritime research firm Drewry. In the first quarter of the year, volumes rose 6.6% year-on-year to 58 million TEUs, reflecting a recovery in demand in North America and a base effect from a weak first quarter of 2023. For Q2, they forecast a modest increase to 60.8 million TEUs, and for the full year 2024, they forecast volumes to total 241.5 million TEUs, up 3.1%, slightly less than BIMCO's 3.6% growth forecast on the previous page. Here are the forecasts for volume growth by major routes from Clarkson's March report. The forecast for 2024 is a 3.9% year-on-year increase in volumes across all routes, with the bulk of the growth coming from the Americas, where demand has been growing since the start of the year due to the economic recovery. The Asia-North America route, which accounts for the largest portion of the container transportation market, increased by 7.4% compared to the previous year. And the Europe to North America route, also known as the transatlantic service, increased by 6.5%, showing that it is struggling to drive demand in the overall container shipping market. Another main lane, the Asia-Europe route, grew only by 0.9% year-on-year, reflecting the tough economic conditions in Europe. This is the container fleet outlook from the Clarksons report. In 2024, 2.6 million TEUs, the highest level of new delivery volume ever, are scheduled to be delivered. In the 2 months from January to February, 450,000 TEU and 67 new ships were delivered, already filling 17.3% of the annual planned volume. As of the end of March this year, the order book is approximately 6.6 million TEUs, which is 23% of the total fleet, a 3% point decrease from 26% at the end of the previous year. This may show that the volume of new building orders during the first quarter of this year was minimal. This continues from the Clarksons fleet outlook on the previous page. As of the end of March 2024, the total capacity of the global container fleet was 28.33 million TEUs, with a total of 6,188 ships in operation. As mentioned before, newbuilding deliveries reached an all-time high in 2023 with approximately 2.3 million TEUs, but this year the record is expected to reach an even higher 2.6 million TEUs, and 1.94 million TEUs will be delivered next year as well. It can be seen that the supply burden on the shipping market will increase as a huge number of ship deliveries have been introduced for 3 consecutive years. In that sense, the route diversion of the Suez Canal and Panama Canal, which began at the end of last year, can be said to be an event that largely offsets the rapidly increasing supply of container ships. However, on the other hand, there are concerns about how the market will be able to withstand the pressure of a rapid increase in supply if this chaotic situation ends in the first half of the year according to market consensus. This page shows Clarksons' annual container supply and demand balance forecast. The gap between the demand growth rate and the supply growth rate in 2024 was 5 percentage points, wider than the 3.6 percentage point gap suggested by the same agency last December. This is mainly due to an increase in the supply growth rate, and part of it, as mentioned earlier, is the increase in the number of cases of canceling or delaying demolitions and recycling plans as older ships are being deployed to prepare for supply chain disruptions such as the Red Sea crisis. According to BIMCO, the amount of demolitions in the first quarter of 2024 is only about 2 million tons, the lowest level since the 2008 financial crisis, well below the usual level of 3 million tons per quarter. Let us take a look at Drewry's supply-demand index and freight rate outlook. Simply put, the supply-demand index can be used to gauge the strength of demand compared to supply. The smaller the number, the more excess supply, or weaker demand. It exceeded 100 points during the pandemic, but deteriorated sharply in 2023 and fell below 80 points. However, due to the supply chain disruption that began at the end of last year, it is showing a rebound and will peak at 80 points in the second quarter. However, many market experts predicted that the decline would continue below that level from the third quarter, when the Red Sea incident is expected to be resolved. Also, reflecting this supply and demand situation, Drewry's predicted freight level is expected to drop by 28.9% to $823 compared to $1,156 in 2023, despite a short rebound in the first quarter of 2024. This slide shows demand, supply and utilization rate forecasts for each major route. Trans-Pacific eastbound, the Asia to North America route, will reflect the economic recovery trend and solid economic indicators that have continued since the end of 2023, and demand for container cargo will increase. However, the utilization rate is expected to fluctuate repeatedly due to the supply pressures caused by the introduction of new ship deliveries and the launch of new services on North America routes by major alliances. The Asia-North Europe route is expected to continue to experience oversupply due to weak demand caused by the delayed economic recovery in Europe and the newbuilding deliveries, mainly large vessels. This trend is expected to worsen even more rapidly once the Red Sea incident ends. The Asia-Mediterranean route, like the Asia-North Europe route, is expected to see further deterioration in utilization rates as additional vessels are delivered amidst the economic downturn and weaker demand. The transatlantic westbound route from Europe to North America suffered a sharp decline in cargo volume in 2023 but has shown a gradual recovery starting in the first quarter of 2024 based on demand from the Americas, and this is expected to continue for the time being. Let us take a look at the congestion status of each major port, which is updated daily by Samsung SDS Cello tracking. Looking at the demurrage situation at major North American ports, reflecting the increase in North American cargo volume, the Port of Long Beach on the west coast and New York Port on the east coast saw an increase in the number of vessels calling and lead times within the port during the first quarter. In addition, it was reported that due to the collapse of the Baltimore Bridge at the end of March, some of Baltimore's cargo was dispersed to the nearby New York port, and as a result, the average number of vessels calling from early April to present has increased by about 2 vessels than before. In the case of container ships, one of the methods of capacity management is slow steaming, which aims to reduce capacity supply by intentionally reducing speed. If the supply volume was as high as ever this year, the ship speed would have had to be reduced, but in January 2024, the ship speed was increased mainly for large ships to respond to the temporary shortage of capacity due to the Red Sea crisis. After February, when additional vessels were deployed to some extent, ship speeds were reduced to control ship capacity supply and carbon dioxide emissions. Continuing from the previous slide, let us look at blank sailing and idling, another means of capacity supply management for shipping companies. In February 2024, around the Chinese Lunar New Year holiday when cargo volume traditionally decreases, shipping companies attempted to control capacity by conducting about 120 blank sailings. But according to Sea Intelligence, a shipping research institute, the extent of this was weaker than in previous years. In particular, in the case of the North America route, where demand is showing signs of recovery, blank sailing equivalent to 24.1% of the total vessel capacity was conducted in February of this year, which is much lower than the 70.8% in the same period last year. And looking at idling, that is, the ratio of idle fleets waiting without being deployed on routes, it hit a low of 1.4% in February and then rose slightly to 2.3% in March, the traditional off-season. It can be seen that this is much lower than the 5.3% in the same period last year. The reason why the blank sailing and idle fleet ratios are lower than the previous year is because the demand for ships has increased due to the deetering of the two major canals. This is the end of the ocean part I prepared for this month. Thank you for your attention. Let us now look at the air market trends. To begin with, one of the key indicators in the air transport sector is the freight rate forecast. According to the latest TAC index predictions by Samsung SDS, air freight rates are expected to fluctuate based on region and time period. Taking the route from Hong Kong to the United States as an example, in Q2 of 2024, rates are forecasted to be between $4.68 and $5.05. In Q3, a slight decrease is expected, with rates ranging from $4.28 to $4.47, and for Q4, they're predicted to fall further to between $3.77 and $4.13. Similarly, for shipments from Hong Kong to Europe, the Q2 2024 forecast shows rates between $3.88 and $4.12. In Q3, they're expected to slightly decrease to between $3.63 and $3.74, and Q4 is anticipated to see minimal changes with rates maintained between $3.59 and $3.62. This data is crucial for us to understand the current market and to make strategies for the coming quarters. Predicting the trend in freight rates allows you to plan your logistics more efficiently, ultimately enhancing your company's competitiveness and improving service quality. Let's talk about the trends in the aviation market, shall we? Recently, air freight rates from India have been on the rise, and the reason behind this is the influx of textile cargo from Bangladesh being transported through various airports in India to Europe. An enormous amount of textile cargo is causing significant congestion at airports across India, including Delhi, Chennai, Mumbai, and Bangalore. The transportation time to Europe, which used to take 2 to 3 days, now takes about 5 to 6 days, and even 6 to 7 days to North America. This backlog is creating considerable difficulties in handling cargo, with the booking to shipping process taking almost 9 days. Data provided by Zenita allows us to see just how much this demand for cargo is increasing. Based on data from pre-pandemic in 2019, we can see that the demand for cargo on the India-Europe route has been steadily increasing since January 2024. Particularly, in the 8th week of February 19, there was a 40% increase compared to 2019. As demand rises, so does the issue of supply, with Zenita reporting that the load factor per aircraft has reached 87%. This is the highest record since April 2022. Interestingly, the traditional method of applying air freight rates is an exception for shipments from India. While ocean freight rates are divided by container size only, air freight rates apply based on chargeable weight. For example, when we talk about the air freight rate for the Hong Kong Americas route being $3 per kilogram, we are referring to the rate for cargo which its chargeable weight is over 1 ton. When shipping air cargo, the chargeable weight is determined based on how heavy the cargo actually is and how much space it occupies. For instance, a small but heavy cargo of scrap metal and a lightweight but bulky cargo like a blanket can have the same chargeable weight based on how much they weigh and the space they occupy. This is the essence of consolidation in air operation. Airlines load various cargoes into a single ULD, unit load device, and adjust to maximize space efficiency and create value. Depending on the chargeable weight of the cargo, lighter cargo incurs a higher freight rate, while heavier cargo is offered at a relatively lower rate. Let's look at the trend of spot freight rates by weight segment for shipments from India to Europe as provided by Zenita. The sky blue line represents the freight rate for cargo under 500 kg, showing the highest rate. The black line shows the rate for cargo weighing over 500 kg but under 1 ton, and the pink line represents the rate for cargo over 1 ton, typically showing the lowest rate. Initially, the difference in freight rates by weight segment was clear, but from February 2024, the gap began to narrow, and in March, ironically, the freight rate for cargo over 1 ton became more expensive. The reason for this is limited supply. The characteristic of the textile cargo dominating the Indian market is the importance of punctuality, which requires rapid transportation of large quantities of fabric and clothing. Therefore, securing sufficient transportation space within a designated period has emerged as a major concern. In this context, shippers demonstrate a strong willingness to secure a large amount of transportation space, even if it means paying higher costs to meet schedules. According to the recent analysis for week 12, the freight rate for cargo over 1 ton was set at $3.50, while cargo over 500 kilograms was 10% cheaper at $3.46. This data serves as an important indicator for understanding freight rate trends in the market, highlighting the need to find a balance between cost efficiency and punctuality. Let's dive into the basic indicators that can help us understand the trends in the aviation market. We'll take a look at the TAC index first. The graphs in the slide examine the monthly freight rates for each destination. Starting with the top left corner, it shows the freight rates to the USA. Here, you can see at a glance the trend of freight rates to the USA from 2019 to 2024, before the pandemic began. Although the rates seem to stabilize after the new normal in 2023, they have started to rise again. Particularly, freight rates from India and Vietnam are showing high volatility, but we'll go into more detail in the next slide. Next, let's look at the freight rates to Europe in the top right corner. The freight rates to Europe in 2024 are also on an upward trend. As mentioned earlier, freight rates from India are showing the most significant changes. As April marks the start of the second quarter of the year, let's also take a look at the freight rate trends for the first quarter of each year. January to March typically sees a significant impact from seasonal factors like the New Year and Lunar New Year holidays. However, the first quarter of 2024 saw the market demand having a more significant impact on freight rates than seasonal factors. For shipments to the Americas, the demand from Chinese e-commerce drove the rates, while for Europe, the demand was driven by the Red Sea crisis. The hottest spots in the aviation market recently are Vietnam and India. Especially, the freight rates to the Americas are increasing from both places. Why is this happening? First, Vietnam is influenced by China's e-commerce volumes. Vietnam is experiencing a rapid growth in the e-commerce sector. Not only does Vietnam already have a sizable e-commerce market, but its geographical location also allows it to efficiently relay cargo coming from China or other Asian countries. Located right next to southern China, it receives e-commerce goods that couldn't get enough supply from Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and transports them through Vietnam. Especially, it's becoming a major export hub by progressively developing the capability to more effectively handle and export specific product groups, like electronic products including batteries. Moreover, Vietnam has concentrated factories and their products are mainly suitable for air transportation. Notably, electronic products are a significant part of Vietnam, which produces a large volume of smartphones, tablets, and their components. The scale of clothing and textile products is also substantial, comparable to Bangladesh. Known for manufacturing clothes for global brands, Vietnam often sends these goods by air in line with changes in fashion trends. All these factors are contributing to the rise in rates from Vietnam to the US, which increased to $7.01 per kilogram as of April 1. Compared to last December, peak season of the year during the Christmas holidays and the year-end rush, which was the busiest season with rates recording $7.82 per kilogram, it seems April is no longer off-peak. Next is volumes from India. I mentioned earlier that the freight rates from India to Europe is rising due to a shortage of supply, but now the rates to the Americas is also increasing, which might sound surprising. This explanation will be a good case study to understand the concept of airlines, hub airports and transshipment. When you travel, you can choose between direct flights and connecting flights. Some people choose connecting flights due to economical reasons, but others choose direct flights for better quality of travel. There are people who prefer direct flights over connecting ones because time matters the most when they travel. It seems like the logistics cost is a deciding factor for shippers. Of course, there are direct flights connecting India with Europe and the US, but with rates skyrocketing, it's not always feasible to choose the expensive direct flights. So, they mainly use Middle Eastern airlines like QR, Qatar Airways, TK, Turkish Airlines, and EK, Emirates, to send cargo to Europe and the US. Let's say there's cargo from Delhi going to the US or Europe. If both cargoes use Turkish Airlines, the cargo loaded in Delhi first arrives at Istanbul Airport in Turkey, the hub airport. From there, they are transferred to flights heading to the US or Europe. Suddenly, as the cargo to Europe surges, the section from Delhi to Istanbul experiences a severe shortage of supply. Shippers wanting fast transport pay more than usual spot rates to monopolize the supply in the hub section. Thus, even if the final destination is the US, the competition to secure supply in the hub section ends up raising the rates to the Americas as well. Did you grasp the principle of how the rates to the Americas and Europe shares the hub route through connecting flights and thus rises at the same time? Next is the supply status based on the data released by Servie. Compared to 2019, the global cargo supply has grown by 9.8%. Particularly, the cargo from Asia to the Middle East has increased by 47%, driving the overall growth. Let's take a look at the supply trends by type of aircraft, namely passenger belly, airline freighters, and integrator freighters. As of March 2024, passenger belly account for 43% of the total supply, yet the supply has not recovered by 8% compared to pre-COVID levels. However, it is expected that the supply will gradually ease starting from the summer schedule in April. Airline freighters make up 37% of the total supply, with a 27% increase compared to pre-COVID, but there has been a 10% decrease compared to February, 4 weeks ago. Integrator freighters, accounting for 20% of the total supply, show a similar trend to airline freighters. There has been a 9% decrease compared to last month, but still a 33% increase compared to pre-COVID levels. When looking at the supply trends by cargo type, the dominant market share of passenger belly before COVID has significantly decreased compared to cargo and express carriers. From 2023, the supply share of passenger belly became higher again due to the increased passenger demand. Let's take a closer look at the supply of passenger planes that have found their place again in the era of new normal in 2023. Here is examination of the changes in international wide-body supply from 2023 to 2024. Wide-bodies are long-haul aircraft. You can think of planes with two aisles when you travel. The planes that only have one aisle are called narrow-body planes. Wide bodies refer to large aircrafts like the Boeing 747 or Airbus A380, mainly flying long distances. The supply of these long-haul planes has increased by 56% in Northeast Asia. More than half of this increase in passenger supply comes from Chinese airlines. Those who paid attention to last month's briefing letter might find this quite striking, as it covered the additional supply between the US and China. While US airlines have extended the deferment to operate only a few flights until October this year due to still not recovered passenger demand, Chinese airlines have been granted permission for an additional 15 flights per week due to an increase in passenger demand. Looking in wide-body supply in North America is minimal, whereas the change in supply due to long-haul passenger demand in Northeast this graph, their decision makes sense. The change St Asia is truly remarkable. According to the recent data extracted from the official airline guide, the OAG, there's an encouraging news that the passenger seat capacity in the first quarter of 2024 has recovered to 97.7% compared to the first quarter of 2019. This indicates that the aviation industry is gradually returning to its operational levels prior to the pandemic. Furthermore, if we examine the weekly passenger seat supply between February and March 2024, we find that it has reached approximately 98% of the levels during the same period in 2019. This data suggests that there is a gradual increase in the demand for air travel and that airlines are responding by increasing their passenger seat supply. This is undoubtedly a positive signal, offering a hopeful outlook for both the aviation industry and travelers. We look forward to this trend continuing and anticipate a full recovery in air travel business. This presentation uses data provided by IATA to understand and analyze the changes in demand and supply from after the COVID-19 pandemic to the present, according to time period. Let's take 2019, the year before COVID-19 emerged, as our baseline with a value of 100. Everything was peaceful back then. However, after the outbreak of COVID-19, most countries implemented strict lockdowns to control the spread of the disease. The demand and supply for air travel hit rock bottom. Most airports were closed, and only a minimal number of flights were operated. Despite these challenges, there were essential items that had to be transported by air, such as diagnostic kits, personal protective equipment, the PPE, like masks, face shields, protective suits, and most importantly, vaccines that were rapidly developed and shipped worldwide. I remember the day when the first Pfizer vaccines arrived in Korea, widely covered in the news under the title Vaccine Transport Operation. Vaccines were imported to Korea in February with the slogan on wing body trucks, "Coronavirus cannot beat Korea." During this period, many countries provided emergency disaster relief or COVID-19 support payments to citizens suffering from the corona blues, most of which were spent on online shopping. This also impacted the demand for air travel. While supply began to recover gradually, it remained significantly lower than demand. Air cargo rates reached their peak during this time, and most airlines saw substantial profits in the cargo sector. By 2022, the world was being accustomed to coexisting with COVID-19, and the term new normal started to be integrated into our lives. As the demand for diagnostic kits and personal protective equipment decreased, airlines strived to return to their original schedules and staff levels. In 2023, we finally saw supply exceeding demand, and by 2024, both demand and supply had returned to pre-COVID levels. It's been a long journey, and I appreciate everyone who has persevered through this process. Next, let's look at the demand for Incheon Airport. Recently, freight rates from Korea have been continuously increasing. The reason for this is the increase in the volume of Chinese e-commerce transshipment cargo handled by Incheon Airport. I explained that the reason for the increase in fares from Vietnam to the US is due to e-commerce cargo not getting enough supply from South China and being transported through Vietnam. Incheon is in a similar situation. Cargo enters through Incheon port using regular ferry services from major eastern coastal ports of China such as Dalian, Qingdao, Tianjin, and Weihai, close to Korea, and then goes through the transshipment process to be exported from Incheon Airport to the Americas and Europe. In 2023, Incheon Airport handled about 98,560 tons of e-commerce cargo, increasing by 43.1% compared to 2022 and recording the highest performance ever since the opening of Incheon Airport. Transshipment cargo at Incheon Airport is still increasing, with the total cargo volume in March up 14.5% compared to 2023, and 29% higher than the previous month. Now, let's delve into the latest demand trends at Incheon Airport. The primary reason for the continuous increase in freight rates from Korea is the increased volume of Chinese e-commerce transshipment cargo handled by Incheon Airport. As mentioned earlier, just as e-commerce cargo fares from South China to the US are rising due to supply shortages, Incheon is experiencing a similar situation. Cargo from major ports along the eastern coast of China, such as Dalian, Qingdao, Tianjin, and Weihai, arrives at Incheon port via regular ferry services and then is exported to the Americas and Europe through Incheon Airport. In the year 2023, Incheon Airport processed about 98,560 tons of e-commerce cargo, a 43.1% increase from the previous year, setting a new record for the highest performance since the airport's opening. The volume of transshipment cargo continues to grow, leading to an increase in total air exports. Particularly in March, there was a 14.5% increase compared to the same period last year, and a 29% increase from the previous month. We need to pay attention to this data because these trends could significantly impact the air cargo market going forward. If the trend of Chinese cargo taking up space in Korea continues, the burden on Korean shippers is likely to increase, which is worth noticing. For the final part of our look into the aviation market trends, let's address a key issue: market supply. Throughout our discussion, we've noted the increasing demand and the shortage of supply. You might be wondering whether there are any planned changes to the supply. Airlines follow the International Air Transport Association, IATA's regulations, which typically divide the year into the summer schedule, from the last Sunday in March to the last Saturday in October, and the winter schedule for the remaining months. The summer schedule plans for additional passenger aircraft supply to meet the demand for summer vacations. Let's look at the specifics. The first graph in the left shows the comparison between winter and summer schedules for passenger demand and supply between Asia and the US. It shows that the supply increases by about 5% in the summer schedule, and the demand also increases by about 11% during the summer schedule period, meaning an expansion of belly capacity. Let's see how much cargo a passenger aircraft can carry. A long-haul freighter from Korea to the United States can carry about 100 tons of cargo. However, a passenger aircraft of the same size can only carry 15 to 20 tons. This is because passengers occupy the upper deck, while the lower deck is mostly taken up by passenger luggage, food, water, and items for the passengers. With a 3 to 5% increase in passenger aircraft supply during the summer schedule compared to the winter schedule, there's hope that this might ease the severe supply shortage on the Asia-Americas, Trans-Pacific, route, considering that passenger aircraft account for 43% of international cargo supply. Here's the summary to wrap up today's webinar. The overarching keyword for economy is turnaround. The United States is facing uncertainty over the timing of interest rate cuts due to stronger than expected inflation. China, despite the downturn in the real estate market, is showing a modest recovery trend following the government's economic stimulus policies. However, it is important to be aware of the prolonged geopolitical tensions in the Middle East and the uncertainty stemming from the results of the U.S. presidential election in the second half of this year. As for ocean market trends, they can be summarized as the market once again entering a cold phase. Since the beginning of the year, freight rates have increased due to logistic crises in the major canals, and the excess supply has been offset. However, the market is being accustomed to these conditions, and in the face of doubling supply, the continued recovery of demand in the Americas seems powerless, creating a tougher market environment. For the air market, the persistent strong demand for cross-border e-commerce from China remains an issue. Coupled with robust demand, supply and demand in the first quarter of 2024 have returned to pre-pandemic levels. With the increase in passenger demand starting in April, there is an anticipated increase in passenger aircraft, which leads to expectations for belly capacity supply. In short, an early peak season has arrived in April. Thank you for watching April webinar and have a good day. See you in May again.